All right. Welcome to another edition of Shabbat Lounge. As always, we appreciate you tuning in, and we ask that you'd subscribe to the channel, give us a like, give us a comment, and ask you as well to share this with someone you might know. And we just appreciate your time and that you're here. So today, I'm in the studio with
Jake Pessia.
And Jake and I have been having some conversations, and he had, I was kind of telling him some stories about my life and things that happened to me, and he had some questions about those, and I said, well, why don't you just interview me? So I'm just going to turn it over to Jake, and he is going to lead that.
All right, yeah. Matt has an interesting story about him, and I'm, being only a year into knowing Matt, there's, things come up here and there, and it'd be nice to get all the pieces together, and so we're going to kind of attempt to do that, I guess. And it kind of started with some news you got from a phone call around Thanksgiving time that was kind of a strange phone call from a family member you don't really talk much with or associate much with. And so it was this out-of-the-blue phone call, and why don't you tell us about what that phone call was and why they were calling you?
Yeah. Well, it did all start while I was driving around, which is what I do. I do a lot of windshield time in my job, and I get a lot of phone calls just like you do and everyone else, and I don't always answer these phone calls because I don't know who they are, and I happened to answer this phone call, and I was just like, I thought it might be someone I needed to talk to, and they started talking to me, and I said, wait a minute, what did you say? And she's like, she repeated it, and I said, I think what I heard you say is you know something about my dad, Steve Cook, and she was like, yes, and I was like, oh, okay. What did you need to tell me? And I already knew that it was probably wasn't anything good. And she's like, well, maybe I need to talk to you some other time when you're not driving. I was like, no, it's fine. I said, you've got me right here, right now. And she's like, okay. And she was like, well, I hate to tell you this, but your father has passed away. And so she was calling to let me know that he had passed away. And so that was kind of a surreal moment in my life. I wasn't expecting to get that phone call.
Yeah, and so we'll talk a little bit. I have some questions for you a little later about your relationship with your dad. But how did that phone call make you feel? Was it like confusing or like stressful?
Well, it wasn't really confusing or stressful at the time, but I was really surprised how many emotions that I had to deal with for somebody that I'm not really connected to and haven't been connected to for my adult life. And but I was surprised with that it did bring a lot of sadness, and just I wouldn't think that it would even do that to somebody that but he is and was my father. Right. So I guess
yeah,
it was just thinking about, since I'm the only child, and this is the end of the line. My mother's dead, my father's dead, and there's just me in that group. So
that's kind of interesting, not having a lengthy, strong relationship with your father, and how even then all these emotions rush to you in that kind of situation.
Yeah.
So it's even then there's this connection.
Yeah, and like I said, I didn't expect that.
Right.
I didn't, because I knew that day is going to come for everybody, but yeah, I definitely didn't expect to feel anything.
Right. So, on piggybacking off of that, what can you tell us about your relationship with your father and what that was like?
Well, my relationship with my dad, started at birth. And so
Wow.
He was kind of funny how that works, and he was a very young man, and he was only about 17 years old when he got married to my mother. And he was like a seventh. He dropped out of school when he was in 7th grade, and he he never finished school, didn't get his GED, and as far as I know, he didn't know how to read, and not sure if he knew how to write. So that was a little bit of, he was young and he didn't know much. He had this baby, he had a brand new marriage. I think they might have had me going before they got married, one of those kinds of things. And he was just young, and he did teach me some things that and I have some stories today from some things that he taught me. He taught me the lighter fluid trick, which I was telling you last night.
Yeah.
Which a cool trick of dousing your hand with a lighter fluid and then lighting it. And the theory says the lighter fluid burns before you burn your hand.
Right.
And but when you're 5-6 years old and you try that, things don't work out quite the same. And so I attempted the same thing. I'm like, there's a lighter fluid, there's a lighter. Hey, I can do this. Saw my dad do it. Can't be that bad.
Yeah.
And I did it, and caught my hand on fire, caught my hair on fire, and went to the emergency room and had a bandage on my hand and had second-degree burns and still have scars on my hand today. So
life lessons.
Taught me that good life lesson. Don't put lighter fluid on your hand and light it. Yeah. So don't do that. So that's good advice.
Sounds like something my grandfather would have taught me. He taught me how to suck in the flame from your lighter, from your Zippo lighter. You just suck it into your mouth, and for some reason, as kids, we thought it was cool, and he thought he was teaching us something, and he was how to do dangerous things, basically.
Yeah. Well, yeah, with a beard today, I don't know that I'd recommend that.
Not a good trick. Okay. So what? Let's see. So you told us a little bit about your relationship. What kind of person was your father? Like, what did he do for a living? How did he act towards others? That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, he didn't have an education, so he learned to weld. His dad was a welder, and he was a really good welder and fabricator, from what I understand. And so that was something that he could do. And but he was kind of a mama's boy, and he would work and earn some good money, and then he would decide to quit and go back home. And so growing up, we moved. We followed the oil field around because that's what he was in. And I think by the time I was in second grade, I had already lived 15, 20 different places. Because we just moved and traveled and followed the oil field wherever it went. And so he had that's what he did.
Yeah. And now you had mentioned to me in other times that we would discuss things, some things about your mom. Can you tell us a little bit about your mom?
Yeah, my mom, she grew up with her dad, which was my grandfather, and her parents divorced when she was young, and then she grew up in a broken home, and the stepmother she was kind of like Cinderella, and there's lots of bad stories about how she got treated, and so pretty much by the time she was like 15, 16 years old, she's pretty much on her own and did kind of whatever. And so those kids didn't have much supervision. It was late 60s when she was growing up, and by the time she was 14, 15, 16, she just kind of did what she wanted to do. And she graduated from high school and was successful with school. And then when I was growing up there in Midland, Odessa, she was an Avon saleswoman. And so I would go with her and get left in the car. And I had kind of a temper. I was an angry boy, so I was really angry. And so I'd get bored and tired of waiting on her, and so I would do things like, once again, I saw my dad work on a car. I was like, I can work on a car. I can fix this car. But that's okay. But if there's nothing wrong with the car, a 6, 7-year-old boy does not need to attempt to fix the car.
Right.
And so I would do stuff like that. And I remember one time opening up the hood, and I took off wires. I don't know what I did. But of course she gets in the car, and is like, Nothing. And she's looking at me, and I'm
Oh
like,
man.
I don't know. I don't know what happened.
Yeah,
That's
I
weird.
fixed it, so I don't know why it's not running now. What'd you
Uh-huh.
do to it?
So yeah, so she was pretty mad and had to call my dad, and he rescued us, and so I did lots of crazy things like that for sure. And while I waiting on her, and I also, another crazy thing I did, I was just playing in the yard because my dad, when he did work, he wasn't around much, and he might be out offshore on a drilling rig. And one day I'm playing with this kid, and I decided, for whatever reason, I'm like, hey, I think the kid's name was Pedro. I don't know. And I said, hey, Pedro, let's go fill up that car over there with some gas. I mean, with sand in the gas tank. For whatever reason, I thought that seemed like a really good idea. And he's like, yeah, sounds good. And so we used little shovels and whatever we could find, and we just filled up the gas tank of some guy's car with sand.
So if you're
And
listening now, Matt is very sorry.
yes, very sorry. Very sorry.
Also, Pedro is sorry as well.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. And so, hours later, that evening, there's this boom, 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 pounding on the door, and I'm like, I wonder who that could be. And it didn't take me long, and I'm like, oh my goodness, that guy's mad. And
Yeah.
I'm like, maybe he was mad at me.
Maybe.
And so he yells and screams and says he's going to sue my mom and that we have to pay for his car, and we had no money. So that there was nothing to sue. He
Right.
could sue all he wanted, but we were in poverty, and there was just nothing. There was no money to have there. So, but anyway, I did a few things and was kind of an angry child, and I'm still. This is all happening before I'm about 6 years old.
Okay. And your mom was a good oil painter?
Well, no, my mom was not a painter, but she, I don't know what her occupation was other than she sold Avon while we were there. And, but
But
she
she
was
enjoyed painting? Or am
no,
I getting this confused
you're
with
getting
someone
confused.
else?
So my
Okay,
dad, Steve,
okay.
his mother was the painter.
Oh, that's right.
So,
Okay.
and her name was Chris Cook, and she was an oil painter.
Okay.
And she was pretty talented, but her husband thought it was a waste of time and thought it was
Okay.
dumb. And he came in one day and was like, lady, I'm not paying for any of your paints. I'm not paying for the canvas. I'm not paying for the brushes. Whatever you can make painting, you can keep, and you can do whatever you want. It's your money.
Yeah.
But not a penny of my money is going to that.
Okay.
And so
Yeah.
she took, when she could, she'd take art lessons. She would paint on grocery sacks. She painted on rocks, pieces of driftwood, whatever she could find. But yeah,
Yeah,
she
so
was
this
pretty
was coming
decent.
from your father's father
Yes.
toward yeah. So you could kind of see the progression there of maybe not really treating people well, maybe.
Yeah, and I think he was a harsh man, and I think maybe that my dad was a little nervous about what his dad could do
Uh-huh.
to his mom, my grandmother, and I think that may be one reason he liked being close because he just didn't know. But
Yeah.
I don't really have any evidence, but that's just my theory.
Yeah. So you had a bit of a rough start, and then uh, you mentioned that when you were about 6, your mom left your dad and took you with her.
Yep. So we had like a '79 Ford Thunderbird, and I just remember leaving and telling him bye, and I can still remember it, like it just happened, and I had no idea that we were leaving,
Yeah.
and I wasn't going to see my dad again, and but the good news is she took me to the farm, which were the maternal side of my family, my great grandparents' house, and so
Okay.
I went to the farm out in Knox County, and that's where I lived with her.
Okay. And then did you? I think I'll go to this other question because it kind of goes into straightening out the timeline in my mind because it gets a little hairy because you've been all over the place. Like you said, you'd moved but by the time you were 6, you had already moved several times. And
so many places I don't keep up with it or try to keep up with that. I just, basically I spent until I was 6 in the Midland, Odessa area.
Yeah. And then you went and lived with your great-grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
and I ended up living with both sets of my great-grandparents because they lived in the same little town.
Okay.
Which is kind of interesting, but they were separated from each other just, like 5 miles or so.
Okay.
And so I lived with my great-grandmother on the paternal side, and then I lived with my great-grandmother on my maternal side.
Okay.
And so, and then I did that for, until I was in 2nd grade.
Okay. And then there was a series of, like, you had foster parents.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, how did that situation come about?
Yeah, so I, in 2nd grade, I rode the Yellow Dog school bus every day. So, and if you've ever done that, then you know what it's like to get on a school bus, and a crowded school bus, and be a little person, and everyone's looking at you, and you feel this pressure. You better sit down. The bus driver starts getting patient with you, and he starts easing the bus forward, and you're like, man, I got to sit down. And nobody wants to let you sit in with them, and they don't want to scoot over. So I did all that, and the bus was definitely a harsh place. And I met this kid one time. He had big Coke bottle glasses, bright red hair, and had a little sister with him, and they all picked on him, thumped his ears.
Is that why you take so kindly to me?
Maybe so. Maybe so.
This sounds like a description of me.
Yes. And so he needed a place to sit down, and so I was like, okay, you can sit with me. And we started talking, and it's like the scene from Nacho Libre, if you've seen that movie.
I have not.
Oh my goodness. I'm going to have to work on that, Jake.
Okay.
So in Nacho Libre, he's sitting down with the nun. It's the Jack Black character, and he's talking about, do you like puppies? And she's like, yes, I like puppies. And brown is my favorite color. Oh, me too. Brown is my favorite color too. And so it's kind of like that moment that Gabe and I have. So, and he is, everything he's saying, I'm like, yeah, I do that too. I like that. Yeah, my grandparents' farm. Your grandparents' farm? You play with toy tractors? You collect toy tractors? You play in the dirt with your tractors? Hang on, where do you do this at? I'm coming over tomorrow. And so we instantly formed a friendship that we still have to this day, and it started there. So anyway, we even went to the same church. I grew up Church of Christ. He was Church of Christ. And he told his parents about me, and they said, yeah, he can come over. So I had a pony named Sugar. Okay. And so every day after school, I would catch her.
This is not a weird story at all.
No.
And you probably delivered pizzas on this pony.
No pizzas, but I did deliver a few rocks in the general direction. Oh. So, but that's another story. But anyway, I did have this pony, and every day I would get off the school bus, I'd catch her, saddle her up, and ride her to Gabe's, and we'd play till dark. And the first time I did that, I rode her up, and I saw Gabe's dad, and I'm like, Mr. Moudy, I need a place to put my horse. And he's like, who is this kid? He's like, he just thought it was a really cool story. He still likes to tell that story today. And because I was a husky kid, I did wear the husky jeans, and I had a cowboy hat on and had my pony, and but that was a pretty good impression because he said I was polite, and he was like, somebody has put some time into him. And it was when I spent time with my I guess they'd be they were my maternal grandparents, and they really invested and kind of taught me some things before I got to there. And so something that I skipped in this timeline is right now I'm living with my grandmother, which is my mother's mother.
Right.
And so when we're in Lubbock, Texas now. And so anyway, I meet this family, and they start taking me to church. And so they drive like 45 minutes out of their way every Wednesday and every Sunday to take me to church.
Okay.
And so I want to say that they put like an extra 150 miles on their car every week for me, and just to take me to church.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So pretty impressive that
Yeah.
they were willing to do that, and did that for me from the time I was in second grade all the way until I was old enough to drive. So so that got me connected with them. My mother remarries, and she ends up being married 3 different times. And her last husband, she was in a bad way. She'd always been in and out of drugs and mostly marijuana. We grew that was a common thing to grow at our house growing up, and she she struggled with that, and then she struggled with anorexic and bulimic, and she thought she was fat at some point, and she was always a small person. She wasn't very big ever, and so she stopped eating, and she wouldn't even drink water. And when she died, she only weighed like 88 pounds, and so she was not a large person.
Yeah.
And but she had it in her mind that she was, and I think it threw off her chemical imbalance, and she ended up committing suicide when I was about 16. And so, but before that had happened, I had gone up to see her. At the time, she had gone to Indiana, and I decided to stay because school had already started. And she let me finish where I was at, and so I didn't have to move. Because a year before, I had to move, only to move back. And so we moved to Snyder, Texas, and I was down there for less than a year, and then we were back in Lubbock. And so when she went on to Indiana, she said, hey, she let me pick, and so I chose to stay. And the Moudys let me stay with them, and when that happened, she signed over custody to the Moudys, actually like a temporary custody. And then when I went up to see her, she wasn't right, and she would tell me things like, I was playing high school football, Friday Night Lights, and I remember before a football game, she told me one time, "Hey, Matt, I'm afraid I might do something to myself when I'm left, by myself." And I was young. I think I would handle that different today.
Right.
I just went on and played my football game.
Yeah.
I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And then
Mom's weird. Mom's saying weird stuff.
Yeah. And I knew it was weird. And so the next day, I called my great grandmother, or one of my grandmothers, I don't know which one, and I said, I don't know how you're gonna do this, but you have to buy me a plane ticket, and you got to get us back to Texas. And she did, and so it was when we came back to Texas, she knew that she wasn't in sound mind anymore, and that's when she signed over custody, to the Moudy family, which they ended up raising me till I was 18. So.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And then did you ever rekindle things with your father?
Well, it's interesting you said that. About 16, when I was about 16 and starting to drive, for some reason, he reached out to me, and he got me to come down there, and so I went to see him, and we went swimming like at his sister's house, and she had a nice place, but he was very poor and didn't have anything, and he kept promising me that he was going to get me a car, I was going to live there, we were going to be awesome and all this, and I just didn't buy it. I was like, whatever, man. I didn't believe it, and I believed that my future was better with the Moudy family and with my mother than with him.
Yeah, so, I think there's something in the if you look at and you've probably gone through this of being a former teacher, the poverty mindset, I think people tend to want to buy your love because they place extra importance on monetary things or material things because they don't really have that so much. So I think if they can sacrifice for that, it'll mean more to you, kind of thing. I think something like that. Do you think maybe it kind of came from that direction?
Yeah, most definitely. That side of my family very much, the Cook side of my family definitely has a poverty of mind, poverty of spirit, and that makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought about it like that, but yeah, that's very possible.
Okay, and then did that amount to anything after you met up with him? Did that like?
It just served as a marker in my life, and made me realize that I had to get away from that. That part of my family was manipulative, and I just didn't trust it. They kind of wanted to lay a guilt trip on me, and I just never responded well to that guilt trip business.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe in my life what happened is, just recently in our Torah section we've been talking about Jacob and Esau, and I kind of operate under this theory that Yahuah is calling everybody, and he wants everyone to be a part of his kingdom, and but we have a choice to be Jacob or Esau, and I feel like at a young age I chose to be like Jacob, and I chose to be about my father's business, sometimes even not even knowing that's what I was choosing. But I knew I wanted to be connected to church. I knew I wanted to be connected to the Bible and to people who knew that.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad didn't offer me any of that. And I knew that my mother did a little bit. She had been to church some, and she definitely supported me going to church. But and so I, that's why I pursued staying where I was and not with my father.
Right. And then in 2012, you were on a vacation of sorts, and you thought, let's swing by Dad's, right? Something like that came up, and that was kind of one of the last time you saw him, or was that the next time you saw him?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the last time I saw him. So, it was kind of a weird deal, and I believe it was a move of the father. And I was not aware at the time that that's what it was. But looking back on it, that's what it was, because we were headed to Tucson, and we had gone to Lubbock and spent the night with the Moudy family up there. And then the next day we were trying to get to Tucson from Lubbock, and then I was looking on the map and how we had to go, and I was like, oh, we're going to be driving through. And basically, literally, if I remember right, I kind of had an idea. And then about an hour before we got there, I had Keely look it up on the phone, on Google, and I said, look up Nanny Cook or Chris Cook, and she found her address, and there was a phone number. Called her, and sure enough, this little old lady answers it, and it's like, hello, and I'm like, this is Matt, and she's just like, she lit up. She knew exactly who I was, no doubt about it, and I'm like, oh wow, I've struck something here,
yeah.
and I was like, I was kind of thinking we might come over, and she's like, yeah, and she cooked us breakfast, and we came over and saw her, and saw Steve, and that was the last time I saw both of them. But it was kind of interesting is when I was talking to the girl that called me. She's a cousin, and she told me that my nanny talked about that moment until she died. That was a significant moment in her life.
Wow.
And she talked about it and how proud she was, because by that time I had 3 kids and my wife, and she met all of us, and she just went on and on about how proud she was, and it was a big deal to her.
Yeah, and it was a big deal too for you to have your father and your grandmother, right, to see their grandkids, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was good for my kids to see how they lived, because she still lived in the same little trailer house that she had lived in since the 70s, and it hadn't changed.
Yeah.
It was exactly what I remembered.
Yeah.
And so
I bet she has some crazy stories. I bet it would have been nice to be able to interview her. She probably has some interesting stories, and that would be interesting.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, and she didn't like to tell many of those stories, and but apparently she could sing, and she did tell me that when she was a little girl, she sang with Tex Ritter in East Texas on some radio program that he did, and probably in the 50s or something when she was little. And I do think there was a lot more to her, and
Yeah, just to
unfortunately,
know who she was,
yeah, yeah,
like in her heart, to be in a position for her to get that stuff out
yeah,
would be
yeah.
cool.
Well, and unfortunately for her, she's the story of what could she have been as a person had she had a spouse that was more supportive
Mm-hmm.
and encouraged her instead of was kind of a jerk to her about it.
Yeah. So what can you tell us about like how you break away from that kind of path of destruction where uh, the people in your lineage are kind of going one direction and then you break away from that. This is kind of like a how the sins of the father pass down to the children, and eventually you got to break away from that. And how do you see that, and
Yeah.
in this situation?
Hmm. Well, like I said, I was kind of an unusual child, I think, and because I felt a calling, I felt God calling me at a really young age, and I knew that He had a plan, and He needed me to learn about Him, and I had an unusual desire and thirst for knowledge. I couldn't get enough of the Scriptures. I loved being around it, and I loved being around people who loved the Father, and I was very attracted. And so my great grandfather Carl was, he spent a lot of time with me, and that's where it really started. He invested time with me,
Mm-hmm.
and the way he did it was real simple. He worked on a farm. But it started with my desire. I wanted to be around him because I knew he was a great man. Because I had, the Father put a longing in my heart for a father, and that was achieved through him. And was the first earthly father that treated me like a father should. And all he did was he didn't do anything special. It wasn't anything amazing. It wasn't like he had some secret formula that this is how you treat kids.
Yeah.
He went and worked on the farm, and I went with him. If he picked up a shovel, I picked up the shovel, and I just stayed with him and worked as hard as he would. And wherever he went, I went. We went to the gas station together, and so everybody in town, they knew when they saw Carl, he had this little sidekick with him, this little blonde-haired boy, and I went everywhere he went. It was like I was a sponge for him, and I just couldn't get enough of time with him. And so even when I would leave that farm there in Knox City, I would cry and cry myself to sleep when I had to go back with my mom. And even though I loved my mom, but I knew that my mom could not give me what my grandfather Carl could give me.
Needed, right?
Mm-hmm. And I needed a strong male role model, and that's what I desired. And I think because I desired that and kept pursuing those things, he kept providing for me.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of important things in that little story, because a lot of times, like specifically for me, like there's no magic formula that made it work. It was just be the example. And growing up, I was like very unaware of what my purpose was or my gifts were, to like, oh, you got to go out and preach the word, right? And all this stuff, and tell everyone all your testimony. I'm like, testimony? I don't even know what that means, And I don't know what my testimony is. I've been me my whole life, What am I gonna say? But I kind of fell on. I would always fall back to that. What you're saying, just be the example, and maybe through my example, people can see that there's a different way to do things or whatever. So I think that is a big way to just instill things in other people. So I think that's real cool.
Well, and I would say that the way to be a good father, that's what you do. You pick up your kid, you take them with you. You have them just go wherever you go. You have them help you. You have them participate. If my Noah used to always complain because we would go see someone like these grandparents when he was little, and I'd turn off the TV and be like, all right, it's time to go. We're going to go do some work now. Mm-hmm. And they're just like, what? You turned SpongeBob off? And, and then I would make them carry sticks of firewood. And even when they were little and they were terrible at carrying sticks of firewood, and they could carry one little stick and put it, in a pile, and it's all crooked.
Put it crookedly in the pile,
I kind of, I learned to kind of accept whatever they did, and then sometimes when they weren't looking, I would kind of straighten it to meet more my liking. But when they were there, I tried to leave it just like it was, and so they could see that they had contributed and helped. Yeah. But I feel like that is something as fathers, that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to make our kids know how to do some things. And so to this day, Noah, he's in his 20s, and he goes and he's with other people his age, and he's always amazed at how many of them don't know how to do anything. And, he's like the only guy in the group that knows how to change a tire. And everyone else is just watching him in amazement, going, wow, how did you know how to do that? And he's like, I had to.
Yeah. Had to know how to do it.
Yes.
Or we didn't get home.
Yes.
Right? That kind of thing.
So.
Because Dad wouldn't do it for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So regardless of those things in your past that might have been detrimental, that you had to overcome, I think that, let's see, what you talk about what were some of the redeeming qualities of your father, that because Yahweh doesn't make a mistake on who your parents are.
Mm-hmm.
And there is something that carries over to you that is for a purpose. And I think it's important that we find that in the relationships, especially when a relationship's hard. It's okay, where's the thing that this person who has wronged me, per se, what have they instilled in me that is a good thing? Mm-hmm. And then see them kind of in that light. So what are some of those redeeming qualities that you see that carry on from your father?
Yeah. Well, as far as like character things, unfortunately, I don't have many that I can think of on character, but I do feel like he was a pretty happy-go-lucky guy, and he smiled a lot, and he seemed to be pretty easygoing with the world. And so I definitely think that he passed on that trait to me. And I think he was very talented with his hands, and he could weld. He could fix anything. He was really good at fixing, welding, just with his hands, and he passed that on to me, as well as he was a musician, and that got passed down to me. I'm not near as good as he was. And his grandmother was an artist, and so there's definitely a line of, she was also a writer, and so those things got passed into me. I like writing. I get paid. Part of what I do to this day, I get paid partly to do some writing and some internet writing and blogging and marketing, and but definitely some of those qualities got passed on through that line in my side of the family, and then my children have exemplified those, and all of my children are artistic and can draw and can
they're definitely very artistic.
Yes, and can do music and video production. I mean, they can do all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so when my kids grow up and people ask them, how are you such good artists, it's Matt's kids were good artists.
And and
no,
later,
my wife's a good artist also.
Yeah, she is. And later in life, I figured out I could weld, and I always felt like that I could, and I just never really had done it. And once I got into it, I'm like, yeah. And so I definitely picked up some good skills through that DNA.
Uh-huh. So how can people look at this trajectory of your life and be encouraged that Yahweh really cares for us and has a plan of redemption for us if we would just choose the path that He wants us to be on?
Yeah, I think everyone goes through a little bit of what I did, and we all have a choice to be Jacob or Esau. And maybe every day you could boil it down as simple as saying we have that choice to be Jacob today or Esau today. And for me, fortunately, for more days of my life, I chose to be like Jacob than I chose to be like Esau. Certainly, there were days I chose to be like Esau. Just, definitely all of us do the wrong thing and have done the wrong thing. But in the end, those Jacob days outnumbered the Esau days. And I think that, it goes back to the Father's calling us all. And we can listen to that call or we can suppress it. And I think, even Paul later on makes it clear about, if we stop listening, we sear our conscience. And I think that's the danger. When you stop listening, that's what can happen.
Suppress the voice of the Holy Spirit.
And I think He was in me all along from a small child, and I listened to that more than anything. And I also tell people there's no excuse. I get so tired of people today that make excuses and say, well, it's because of my childhood, it's because of this, and they blame everything on other, everyone but themselves and their own actions, and in the end we each have to decide what we're going to do. And so you can either feel sorry for yourself and say woe is me, or you can just go, well, especially when I became an adult and probably really late in high school, I made a decision that I was going to set a new course for my life, that I wasn't going to go down the path that even my mother went down and my father went down and even some of my grandparents went down. It was going to be different. And so I made a choice early in life that I was going to be different, and I stuck to it.
Yeah, like these things in my past happened, but they don't define who I need to become.
Yeah.
And then you talk a lot about the how how the blessing of following, making those right choices, of being the Jacob in the paradigm, and the blessing of that is family, right? And what Yahweh instituted from the beginning is this family unit, and you talk a lot about that being a blessing, even though your maybe biological family would be hard to look at to see the blessing in it, and then how that changes to what your family is to you today, kind of. Is there like some kind of way to describe your thoughts on how that blessing kind of manifests?
Yeah, well, for me, definitely, it took a little bit of both. A biological family who nurtured and cared for me, and pointed me in the right direction. My great grandmother, who was Carl's wife, she every day she'd make me take a nap. And as I was napping, she would read Old Testament to me. And so I can remember that's my first exposure to Old Testament stories, that she decided to read those to me. And, I still remember those well. And she would, she'd give me things like a family Bible. And, she would do kind of goofy things, like she would hide a $50 bill in it. And she'd hand you your Bible, and she'd be like, "Search the Scriptures, Matt." And so I learned quickly
wink, wink.
what that meant, to search the Scriptures.
Turn your Bible upside down.
That's exactly what I did.
I did, and you know what I found?
And but she did that as a way to protect me too, because she knew that I might really need money. to get out of a jam.
Yeah.
And so she made sure that I had some money in case we got in a financial jam at home. And there were times when I had to help my family and give them money to have food on the table. And that's not, that's hard for a lot of people to imagine, asking your child who's in elementary or junior high to help you pay the bills, but that can happen to people for sure. So, but it was a combination of biological family helping me, as well as the Moudy family. The whole way that I even meet the Moudys is a crazy story, because Alvin had been farming up in Happy, Texas, and he lost his farm, and so he went bankrupt, and he didn't know what to do. And so all he knew is that he lost his farm, and he had an eviction notice, and he had to move out of this house. And he said they were packing everything up, and he had this feeling that he needed to go back in the house. And this is before people had cell phones, and he just has a landline, and the phone was still plugged in. And he went inside the door, and as he went inside the door, the phone is just ringing off the hook. And he's like, okay, and he picks up the phone, and on the other line is a man offering him a job in Lubbock, Texas, which places him at the children's home. Before I arrive, he's there and has this position. And so, the father had set all that up, years in advance, and to him, it saved him out of a jam. But in reality, we all believe that the reason that phone call happened and the timing of that was so that he would be in the right place at the right time to meet 8-year-old Matt riding his horse. Yeah. And that was all preordained. And it's cool to be a part of a story like that, for sure. So
awesome. And then
I don't know if that answered your question.
Sure. It's all information. It all goes in. Although I think you lost our millennial viewers when you talked about the landline ringing off the hook. I don't think that makes much sense to some folks today.
There was no voicemail to roll over to.
No.
It just rang until you got tired of holding the phone.
Yeah. And then just kind of to finish up, what's some advice that you would give to parents and grandparents? Things that you had mentioned, like not taking your children for granted, and don't take your responsibility lightly, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, the single greatest thing I tell parents is, sometimes people ask me questions about, since I'm a former school teacher, sometimes people ask me questions about their kid, and I always lead with, this is your child. If you want them to do this, you can make it happen. If the school isn't doing what you want them to do, it is your child. You either try to get the school to help you more, or you make a decision that public school may not be the place for my child anymore. And I think you got to have that attitude that you are going to come, for lack of a better term, for hell or high water, I am going to do whatever it takes. And I think you have to have that attitude and to right the ship and to get a kid going the right direction. I can look back in my life and moments when I was too busy, thought I was too busy, and maybe there were, when I had one of my own children in crisis, when I should have called in work and said, hey, look, I'm not coming in. But I can remember some of those moments when I should have stayed, dealt with, and helped discipline or whatever I needed to do for my child at that moment. And you have to make those calls, and sometimes it costs you money, literally. But it's worth it, because we have such a narrow window as a parent to make an impact on our children, and so I think you have to have that bulldog approach, especially in today's culture, which is trying to rip your child away from you and try to turn them against you every step of the way. And so I think you have to have that attitude, and the attitude that's about time. Our children, especially fathers are so crucial. The more time a child spends with his father, the more successful they're going to be, and the more confident they're going to be. Just time with their dad builds confidence like no other thing can, and so I think that's true. And then for grandparents, a lot of times what happens at grandparenting is a lot of grandparents find out maybe they missed some things the first time when they were parenting, and now they've got some wisdom and they understand some things maybe they didn't when they were young raising their own kids.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things they have to understand is be willing to drive out of your way to spend time with that child, invest in their future, because you don't have no idea the impact that you might make on them. Just as simple as my great grandmother, read me a Bible story. As simple as my great grandfather taking me everywhere he went. It's not rocket science. You don't have to have a degree. You don't need to be the child whisperer. You just have to do it.
Yeah.
And being around and investing in them as people is definitely the best thing I believe you can do.
Yeah, and I think I wrote down a couple things that I garnered from discussions with you and things like that I think are pretty good tips. Then investing time, of course, and being a role model, just getting over your baggage and not making excuses, realizing that you're going to be leaving your kids with some baggage. So think about that while you're raising your kids. Do I want to leave them with this?
Yeah. Well, I think, for me, I have kind of realized that I can't, definitely I'm scarred, and I think anybody that goes through something like that, it is going to affect you, and it takes a while sometimes to get over these things, but hopefully we do less damage to our own children than what was done to us.
Right.
And and that's what I'm hoping for. And with me, the bar was pretty low. It wasn't hard to be better than that.
Yeah, and it comes from the refining in the fire. So once as you're being refined, it's going to impact your children in a way that now when they're refined, their kids will have an even purer, more pure element there.
Yeah, I feel like they're going to be so far ahead of the game than I was. It's not even, you can't even compare it, because I not only do I have all that happening with me, then I have the whole thing about being in regular church and churchianity and all that going, and my kids don't really have that baggage.
Yeah.
They I got rid of all that, so they don't have to deal with that.
Yeah.
Not as much.
Right. And then just being aware of the generational curses and how you can try to get rid of those. And
I think you definitely have to denounce those things.
Yeah.
So my grandfather, which was Steve's dad there in Midland, Odessa, Leon Cook, he was a 32nd degree Mason. And so I definitely have spent time denouncing that. And I think that's something you have to do. If you have that in your bloodline lineage, that you have to spend some time dealing with that and making sure that doesn't get passed down to your children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's pretty much all I had. I mean, that's I think you did a good job pulling the timeline together and answering some questions that I had just from discussions we've had and things I've heard, and from some rough and humble beginnings to the titan of industry that you are now.
Yes, yes. Well, I appreciate you taking time to do that and let me talk about those things, because I do think there are things in my story that people can learn from, and it's a story I believe that needs to be told, and I enjoy telling it, and I hope that somebody can benefit from it. So
yeah, and there's definitely other stories that we didn't get a chance to get to, but I'm sure they'll crop up, in different episodes.
Sure.
So keep listening, and you'll hear those.
That's right. Stay tuned. So we appreciate you taking time and listening to Shabbat Lounge, and thank you for your subscription. And as always, we just ask that you give us some comment, because we get no comments. So any comment.
Don't be afraid to comment. That's right. We have a lot of listeners who are afraid to comment.
Mm-hmm.
But we're just humble folks, and we want to learn together. So
yes, and that's right. Learning together is the key. So, but we do appreciate you listening, and ask that maybe you'd share this with someone if you know somebody that would be uplifted by hearing about this. And anyway, once again, we thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you later.